I have to begin today's video with a quote. Here it is. A death sentence for gaming. Now, those are not my words. Those are words from the man who oversaw software at PlayStation. He's Shawn Layden, and he began working in games in PlayStation before I was born. And from 1987 to 2001, he rose up the ranks and he became the chairman of PlayStation Studios. So he is a well-respected guy who has seen all of it from the inside, from just about the beginning, and he is seeing problems in today's industry. He said this: "If we're just going to rely on blockbusters to get us through, I think that's a death sentence." And of course, he worked through the rise of the Sony blockbuster, so I dare say that Shawn actually knows what he's talking about. Today's story happened because Shawn Layden did a panel with Raw Fury's chief publishing officer, and in that he outlines essentially how screwed much of gaming is. Here's how he put it: "We're seeing a collapse of creativity in games today with studio consolidation and high cost of production." Yeah, a collapse in creativity, and I think that's something we've all felt. Certainly, if you looked at, say, PS2 to PS3, from 3 to 4 and 4 to 5, in terms of games, yeah, there is less creativity. Less creativity is possible, and if it were only up to the big publishers, we would be in trouble. Layden explains it like this: "The entry cost for AAA games is in the 3-digit millions. Now, this reduces risk tolerances such that the finance guy," and this is how he put it, "the finance guy who draws the line will say, if Fortnite makes this amount in that amount of time, my Fortnite knockoff can make this in that amount of time." And yeah, hyperbole, but his point stands of a lot of trend chasing and not that much creativity. And even to take Fortnite clone literally, we've had Spellbreak, Realm Royale, Radical Heights, Darwin Project, Hyperscape, Rumbleverse, Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier, Battlefield, Firestorm, and many dead before release projects. And on top of that, the many projects that were mangled to try to trace those trends. Looking at you, Battlefield 2042 and your launch edition. And on the topic of sequels, well, we all know that new IP is absolutely on the downtrend. So Layden's point is that slowly but surely these financial pressures mean that part of the ecosystem is dying out. And the sad thing is, if you're one of the younger viewers in this channel, you probably never saw that ecosystem when it was healthy. Now, I have a quick ask for you. It's really quick and it's free. If you'd like more videos like this from me and the team, please hit the subscribe button. And the reason I say that is you basically help me by giving the YouTube algorithm a good signal. That helps get more content out there, and that helps me keep on investing in our team to make the best stuff we can for you. You see, much of Shawn's point is the past was not defined by blockbusters, and obviously live services barely existed. Here's a quote: "That middle layer that used to be where Interplay, Gremlin, Ocean, THQ, all of those companies made their money is gone. And there's a very good chance you may not even know most of those names. The idea of Interplay and Westwood Studios, that may not exist in your head because by now it is a bygone era." Today he outlines you either become a big AAA and survive, or you go indie and be interesting, but that AA, middle level of scale is gone. And the reason why is simple. First-party blockbusters created huge budget, tech-forward titles that raise people's expectations, and PlayStation set that standard. The big first parties keep pushing that to try to get their system sellers, and then the third parties struggle to keep up, and they're forced to optimize hard. And when we look at third-party publishers, we see that in their output. Take-Two Interactive are the sports and GTA Online people, at least in terms of where the money comes from. And even for a recent story, we literally saw how GTA 5's story DLC died. Activision transformed from its old self that used to make so many games in so many genres into a Call of Duty machine. Electronic Arts ran the Battlefield franchise into the ground. They killed the Medal of Honor franchise, all in an attempt to try to ape Call of Duty. They happened to luck out with Respawn Entertainment. They drove BioWare into a lost decade, but happened to have their asses saved by the likes of sports, Sims, and a few safe bets. With a track record like that, it's fair to say that the arts bit very much took the back seat. Money soon flowed into fewer IPs and larger games, and that raises a simple question. Why would you incur the risk of creating something from nothing when you can just exploit an asset that you already have? That's why the third parties went that way. Now, the democratization of tools has opened up the indie space, but soaring costs have raised the floor beyond what AA used to be. Shawn Layden puts it this way in his talk, quote, "When I started, games cost $7 to $8 million to make and you could charge $59.99. Now they cost $150 million, but there's no price elasticity, so you can only charge $59.99. And I know as a consumer, that might feel a bit odd sometimes. You feel like you're not getting the best creative output of the industry, yet the prices are still fairly high. But when we run the numbers, we do see at least some of what Shawn is saying here. So number one, let's update his current day price to $69.99. Now, his example of the industry's younger days would have 133,000 units at $59.99, breaking even on what he said the cost of development would be. But of course, a third-party publisher could expect to receive about 50% of the sale price, especially when you're taking retail into account, so we'll update that to 266,000 units. That's how much you need to break even. What about a modern title then that is selling on a 70-30 split on a digital storefront, which is in fact a better split than in the past? Well, at $69.99 on a budget of $150 million, you would need to sell 3 million copies at full price to break even, which is obviously extremely hard. And even if you're Sony for, say, Spider-Man 2, where you're not dealing with a 70-30 split because it's your own damn platform and it's a system seller, well, you still need to sell 7 million copies of your game to break even. And yet it's with games like that that these companies have tried to manage their risk, and it's why they've consolidated into the few big bets rather than many different smaller risks. And part of this is because companies think they need to go big to stand out, right? That's what they need for mass appeal. And we know that's almost always in the form of absurdly expensive, flashy graphics, not exactly gameplay. Now, indie games can go big, but the problem is few indie publishers can drop the 20 to 40 million on a game that would be more in line with what a AA in today's market could actually cost. And that's what leaves us in this crumbling state, with the incumbent first parties doing their big massive games and third parties no longer having the large diversified strategy of the past, but instead consolidating into live services and IP that they already have. And that's why Shawn laments the old days. He says this: "We asked a simple question, is it fun? Are we having a good time? If you said yes to those questions, you'd usually get the green light. You didn't worry so much about the end piece, for better or worse." And that may seem completely insane in terms of how you're spending your money as a publisher, but think for a second of the unit economics that I mentioned earlier, of how these games publishers were able to just publish so many more games than today. Risk was diluted because yes, they were taking many bets, but they were smaller bets. And the creative death spiral that Layden spoke of is because that no longer exists in the big publishers. You don't get a Call of Duty Black Ops 6 without doing Call of Duty 1. So many of today's incumbents started off as small, measured risks, the sorts of things that those big publishers no longer think they need to bother with. And a lot of that is Layden's big point, that the industry is not healthy when it's consolidated into mega hits. But that's not to say this is purely just wisdom from someone who's been in the industry for a long time. He does have a job, he has a horse in this race. He is now strategic advisor to Tencent, and this was all part of Gamescom Asia. So it's no surprise that Tencent's strategy in many places does line up with Shawn's advice. Here's the thing with Tencent. Yes, they absolutely are a humongous megacorp conglomerate. In games, though, they are shockingly diversified in the West, and they're actually deep in AA. They've been investing heavily in indies and established niche players. That means examples like Paradox Interactive, Frontier Developments, Platinum, of course, the character action game people, Fat Shark and Jaeger, along with many other studios. And they were also able to jump onto things like Riot Games and Grinding Gear Games. They basically snapped up those disruptors that took AAA by surprise. And while we think about, say, the Battle Royale graveyard of today, that's just because we've forgotten about the MOBA graveyard, where absolutely everybody tried to get their slice of the MOBA. There was even a Lord of the Rings MOBA from Electronic Arts. Yeah, pretty weird. Tencent's whole point essentially is to have a little bit of everything so that they capture underlying sector-wide growth rather than just gambling on the mega hits. And you can think of so many analogies, be it putting a lot of money into a new crypto coin that looks really hot, or maybe betting big in some deep dive thesis into a company because, hey, you saw the GameStop stuff and you think maybe Bed Bath & Beyond will be the next thing. You could do that. or you could just invest in something like the Vanguard All-World Index or the S&P 500, examples that are diversified that get you market-wide growth. That's a pretty sane risk-adjusted strategy, and you can see why Tencent would take a similar approach within games. Now, all of this seems like common sense. The problem of our industry being so consolidated in its financials into these mega hits is obviously a problem. But what the hell is a AA game? Who the hell is making them? Well, it turns out that while Shawn is lamenting the death of something, I think he's missing out on something because he is tied to his perspective and how he has seen the industry grow. My end message is actually far more optimistic. It just doesn't really involve the old school incumbents anymore. What Layden laments the death of is low-key thriving, just in a different way. To sample Tencent's non-AAA titles, you've got Jurassic World Evolution, Planet Coaster 2, Vermintide 2, Darktide, and many others. We asked our Discord for AA's, and, well, a lot of things came up. CRPG hits came up like Disco Elysium, the output of Owlcat, or even Obsidian pre their Microsoft acquisition. Lots of CRPGs. Mechabellum came up, but one thing then became very clear. Many Embracer Group-owned studios. That's games like Remnant 2, Evil West, and Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which makes a lot of sense. Kingdom Come Deliverance and Remnant were massively outsized premium indie, maybe you could call them AA hits. Take a look at Flying Wild Hog, they're basically a AA action game machine. And if you know the industry's history, well, Embracer have so many AA IPs because they consumed the corpse of the previous AA games leader, THQ. There are so many ways in which Embracer genuinely looked great. We were even getting a new Gothic game. Well, a remake of Gothic. Pretty damn amazing. But of course, that wasn't all exactly to last. Embracer Group grew irresponsibly fast, and they did so based on finances that were not as rock solid as they thought, such that when the Saudi-owned Savvy Games Group pulled out, well, Embracer basically had to cut off bits of itself to survive, and that did cause irreparable damage to other studios. But going broad and beyond there, a recent game is Clair Obscura Expedition 33. That's being praised because it's targeting 30 plus hours of gameplay, and it's going to be $50, which is getting a bit closer to what maybe the ideal AA title could be. But that's not to say that AA is a magical formula for success. Another company often held up here are Dontnod. They made, as an example, Life is Strange. They're held up as a AA example, but it's not really went amazingly for them lately. Banisher's Ghost of New Eden is 84% on Steam. Jusant is 94% on Steam, but neither of those games performed well financially, and now they've had to delay 2 projects, and there is layoff risk at the company. And worse still, this is happening in a funding environment that is extremely challenging these days. But where Shawn Layden is seeing a lot of this from a supply side, I think there is a demand side fix, but it's a demand side fix that is absolutely in a lot of trouble because of the attention economy. Right now, we buy AAA games that, because of their $150+ million budget and $70 price point, have to be designed to sell 6 million copies or so. Now, we can go and buy indies for $10 to $25 that only need to sell like 20,000 copies to look pretty okay financially. But that middle ground, what used to be back in the day, the THQ published 8 out of 10 game that had a 12-hour long runtime that you bought in a sale, well, those are the things that have fallen by the wayside. But that's what takes me to a disagreement with Shawn, or at least another angle. Yes, the market forces of the big publishers disincentivize them from producing the more creatively risky mid-budget games that so many of us would want. But indies can turn to AA. In fact, they can go even more. If you're Larrying, you can morph yourself into a full big-scale AAA developer. Another great example is Space Marine 2, actually. Now, it is an expensive game, but a former id Software exec, Tim Willits, who is now the chief creative officer at Saber Interactive, he said that Space Marine 2 cost under half of what Doom Eternal did to develop, and it's actually outselling Doom Eternal. So, generally, what was AA has retreated. We have lost some scale. We're not getting it from the same place. But where Shawn talks about a death spiral of creativity really suffering, well, yeah, in some places. Yeah, in AAA. But I think we've actually gained a lot of distributed creative density. Which is to say, niche hits that can actually scale absolutely everywhere, just not completely consolidated. So Shawn is right, there is a deeper problem, but I would say that it's people only seeing AAA, or having their attention captured by live services to the point where they stop finding indies, where they don't get into the alternatives. Because what he laments in this talk does exist, but the solution is not going to be PlayStation or Activision or Take-Two reforming themselves. No, the solution is going to be us supporting good games, so the market takes care of the problem, not the executives, because guess what? We can't trust them. So let this video be a rallying cry, and I do have another Shawn Layden connection. Of course, he was there working through 2021. Helldivers 2 was well in development by that stage, and you can check out this video for just how impeccably Helldivers 2 has been able to turn its story around.